Hi, my name's Manny Talavera. A while back I created a product called the History of the Internet. And the History of the Internet essentially took some of these modern day gurus and it told their backstories. And I told the backstories of Dan Kennedy, J. Abraham, Frank Kern, and a number of others. What I've decided to do is kind of reshoot this content and basically give this information away because I tell you, I have learned a lot about studying the backstories of some of these big modern day gurus. And so what I'm going to do is for the next few minutes we're going to talk about Frank Kern, and I'm going to tell you how Frank Kern got his start. Now Frank Kern is from Macon, Georgia, and Frank barely graduated high school. He actually had a D in math, and that was going to actually prevent him from graduating. But the teacher who taught math really liked Frank, and so what she did is she ended up giving him a C minus so that he would actually graduate high school. Frank immediately rolled in a junior college or community college there in Macon. He flunked out in the minimum time possible, so he failed out in either 2 quarters or 2 semesters, and that was the end of his college career. Now, when Frank was around 18 or 19 years old, the place that he was living in actually flooded. And Frank was actually rescued by the Macon Fire Department. And the only thing that Frank was able to actually salvage was his 2 dogs and a pint of whiskey. That's the only thing he was able to actually take. And everything that he owned, all of his furniture, his car, everything was essentially ruined in that flood. And ultimately, Frank moved into a trailer. Now, this trailer had wooden floors. It was a single wide trailer, and he really struggled. Frank actually got a job. He was delivering Greek food for a Greek restaurant, and he was actually cooking for it. So this is what Frank was doing. He was living in Macon, Georgia. The restaurant is outside of Macon, Georgia. He's driving back and forth to the restaurant. He's actually cooking the food. And after he cooked the food, he was delivering it. So he was actually burning all of his money up in gas. And he was going through so much money in gas that he could not afford the gas bill in the trailer, and they ultimately turned his gas off. Now this is the thing, this was in the summer. It would not be an issue, but the problem is Frank's hot water heater was heated with gas. So Frank would take one of these big gulp cups. He would put it in the microwave and heat it, run it and dump it in the bathtub, refill it up, heat it again, and run it and dump it in the bathtub again. And by the time he got the 3rd cup of water in, the first 2 cups were essentially cold. And that's how Frank was actually taking baths and showers. And ultimately what happened is Frank got an opportunity to move into a house. Frank's grandmother went to church with the lady. And the lady's sister had died, and she had inherited this house. And she went to Frank's grandmother and essentially said, I inherited this house. I would sell you the house for $12,000. You could actually fix it up. And once you had fixed it up, you could actually sell it. So Frank's grandmother goes to Frank and says, Frank, I want you to move in this house, and I want you to help me kind of fix it up, and then I want you to sell it. Now this is the thing. Frank is thinking, wow, first of all, I'm going to get some free rent here, and second of all, at least I'll have hot water. So Frank jumped at the opportunity to move into this house. The problem with this house, it was smack dab right in the middle of the projects. And Frank said he could look out his windows at any time of the day or night, and he could see open drug deals going on. As a matter of fact, Frank said, based on this whole situation with the drug activity in the house, he said he drove by the house many, many, many years later. It was still abandoned, and it was not worth any money because of the neighborhood it was in. But Frank ultimately moves into this house. Now, this is the thing. Frank doesn't have the money to keep driving back and forth to the restaurant. He's trying to do this rock and roll thing. So he's basically doing a lot of drugs and staying up all night and playing in different rock and roll bands. And he's sleeping all day. And he decides to see if he can't find something else to get into, another job. Now, this is the thing, and I think this is a key takeaway. Frank's mother had 4 uncles. All 4 of those uncles went to the war, went to World War II. And when they came back, they all became highly successful. They all became millionaires. And so it was basically a family expectancy that you're going to also do well in business, or you're going to create something and make a lot of money. So Frank's great uncles were all millionaires, and they made most of their money in the car industry. And at the time, they got involved in business. They owned Cadillac dealerships, BMW dealerships, and things like that. But what happened is, this was Frank's great uncles who had started these businesses. So what happened is, as these businesses passed down to kids and grandkids, things kind of got fuzzy, and the businesses were not nearly as successful anymore. And so, so Frank called someone who would have been a second cousin or third cousin, essentially a distant relative, and said, I would like to come to work for you in the car business. And the guy said, sure, I'm going to let you come to work for me. Now, this is the thing. The person Frank called was a 5-time convicted felon. This person had been convicted of bank robbery, machine gun possession, and counterfeiting. And Frank essentially, while he was wanting a change of pace and moving away from the drug lifestyle, actually took a job at this buy here, pay here car lot. And every single person who worked at the car lot was a convicted felon. They were all major drug users. And so Frank took the job, and basically there was just constantly a lot of chaos. There were a lot of problems. There was a lot of what we would call drug-ingested paranoia. And so Frank shows up on a Monday morning one time, and the person who hired him, his second cousin or whoever it is, basically gives Frank a Tech 9 machine gun pistol and says, your job today is to sit in this van, and we want you to watch the car lot because we're concerned someone's going to come and steal everything. Now, there's just a bunch of junk cars on this car lot. The odds of somebody coming and trying to steal anything are like zero. But Frank was basically told to sit in a van all day and watch the car lot with the Tech 9. Now, this is the thing. It's Macon, Georgia, and it's 100 degrees out. And in this van, it's like 150. So Frank sits in the van all day, and Frank is thinking, well, maybe things will get better, right? So the next day on Tuesday, Frank goes back to the car lot. And they say, Frank, we need you to take the porter to get a battery because we bought a battery from this company that's defective and we need you to change it out. Now, the job of a porter at a car lot is essentially to do everything. They go, they get cars cleaned, they get them detailed, they put gas in them. They are essentially a gopher. And this porter was also a drug user, and they paid their porter, get this, they paid their porter $20 a week. But they did not give him all the money on Thursday because they felt like if they give him all the money on Thursday, he would never show up on Fridays. So they would give him $10 on Thursday and $10 on Friday. And so Frank was essentially told to take the porter to exchange the battery because the porter didn't have a driver's license. So Frank and the porter get in the car, and they go to exchange the battery. And Frank picks the battery up and takes it in to get the battery exchanged. And he hands the battery to the guy, and the guy hands Frank a new battery. And then Frank looks around and says, well, where's my porter at? And they said, I think he's outside in back. Frank walks out back to see the porter in a knife fight with another guy. And Frank immediately runs to the car with the battery, throws the battery in the trunk, closes the door, and locks both doors, right? Frank's thinking he's going to get killed or something. The porter runs down the alley, pounds on the door, and Frank opens the door, and the porter's really, really mad. Why didn't you come to rescue me? Why didn't you come to save me? And Frank's like, I don't have nothing. I don't have a knife or a gun. I don't know what you're talking about. Now get this. The porter is all cut up. His face is cut up. Now, they can't exactly go to the hospital because the porter is a convicted felon. And if you go to the hospital and you're all cut up, they're going to say, what happened? And if you say, well, I was in a knife fight, they're going to say, aren't knife fights illegal and aren't you a convicted felon? And you're going to end up back in the penitentiary. So the porter insisted that they go and they get gauze and they wipe his basically clean the face off real good and then put gauze all over his face. The problem is they get blood all over the inside of this car. And Frank and the porter clean the car up as well as they can clean it up, but they don't do a very good job. And so Frank drops the battery off. He ends up going home, and he goes back to work Wednesday. And Wednesday there are no issues. Everything is fine. He's thinking, well, maybe the twilight zone is over. There are no issues. Well, Thursday he gets there, and the second cousin has looked at the interior of that car, and the second cousin is fuming. And the second cousin pulls a gun out and starts actually shooting at the porter, and he shoots at the porter 3 times. And he almost hits Frank. And when he almost hit Frank, Frank said, you know what? I'm done with this. This is not the lifestyle for me. And Frank leaves. And Frank decides he's not going back to the car lot business, or he's not going to be associated with those people anymore. So what happens is Frank goes home. And Frank decides he's going to find another business to get into. Now, while looking for another business to get into, he's actually flipping through like an entrepreneur or a business opportunities magazine, and he comes across a course called Make $4,000 a Week in Your Underwear by Jeff Paul. Now get this, Frank does not have a checking account even. Frank sends this guy a $20 bill for the course, and Frank gets something back, and Frank's amazed. Frank did not even think he would get anything back from the guy because Frank was sending cash in the mail. But essentially, he gets the course back. And he starts kind of studying this direct response business a little bit. And while he's doing that, he's also trying to do other things to make money. So he'd actually started a dog fencing business, putting invisible fences in for people, and he was doing that. And he also started doing credit card processing or selling credit card processing to merchants. And essentially what you do when you're selling credit card processing is you're getting in your car and you're driving all over the place, and you're going in and talking to businesses who already do credit card processing, and you're trying to get them to switch from one processor to another. And Frank is doing a lot of this cold calling. He's doing the dog fencing business. And then a light bulb goes off in his head. Wait a minute. I'm wanting to do this online marketing thing. So maybe I should try to sell credit card processing to people who have online businesses. So Frank essentially starts trying to find people who have online businesses and trying to get them to switch their credit card processing. And Frank calls a guy in Indiana who's doing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars per month on the internet. And Frank says, wow, that is just amazing what you're doing. How are you making so much money per month on the internet? And the guy says, I'm sending spam. Now this is the thing. You need to understand something. I'm going to go over this a couple of times. We're talking about the wild, wild west days of the internet. Sending spam might have been frowned upon, but it certainly wouldn't have been illegal, right? There probably wasn't single or a double opt-in, and you could probably at that time even buy lists. So Frank said, that is awesome. Would you teach me how to send spam? And the guy says yes. Now, as a side note, I studied marketing every day for over 10 years. The only person I know in marketing from Indiana at that time would have probably been Terry Dean. And what's interesting is Terry Dean and I are from the same hometown. And so my mindset here is that Terry Dean actually taught Frank Kern how to send spam. And again, keep in mind, at that time it might have been frowned upon, but it certainly would not have been illegal. But Frank essentially learned how to use traffic to sell things online. And Frank ultimately created a product, and this was Frank's first product, Instant Internet Empires. Instant Internet Empires was a bunch of master resale rights. So actually he was selling resale rights products. He had bundled a lot of products that he had bought. He was selling the resale rights of those products. And he was also sending some videos that would kind of show you how to drive traffic, how to make money, what products to look for, how to offer the products. So Frank put together this instant internet empires and sold it for $47, and he sold 18,000 of them. So he actually ultimately made some money from this product. The problem with instant internet empires is this. Frank was essentially selling a resale rights package. So you buy it and you have the right to sell the package yourself. The problem is some of the people who bought the product were that they were doing things that were illegal. And so what they would do is they would run these ad campaigns and they would sell product to people. And then they would start calling these people and they would back in these people into high-ticket coaching. The problem is these people were using Frank Kern's name. So they had bought this package off of Frank. They didn't have any right to use his name, but they were essentially using his name, driving traffic, and selling basically high-pressure coaching, and then they were not giving refunds. So the FTC found out about this, and they came looking for Frank. So they find Frank, and Frank says, look, I've had a problem with these guys for a long time. I tried to get them to quit using my name and likeness, but they just won't do it. Here are the cease and desist letters I've sent these people. The problem is that this thing drew attention to what Frank was doing, and the federal government decided that instant internet empires was essentially a pyramid scheme. They didn't like it. And so what they did is they took Frank Kern's money away from him, and they essentially told him that you need to send all 18,000 of these people an email and say that, you know, what you did was illegal and you shouldn't sell the product. And essentially they put him out of business and they gave him a bad name in the industry. So Frank essentially had to go to 18,000 people and say he broke the law, even though, you know, in his mind, he had not done anything wrong, right? So Frank now has, you know, he's really done only a few things. He's very, very scared of BizOp or helping people to start a business because of the interference with the FTC. And he goes to one of these conferences, right? And a guy goes out on stage and the guy talks about how he's making a lot of money with an ebook about how to teach your parrot to talk. And Frank's like, well, I could do that. So Frank leaves the conference, and this is what Frank does. He goes out there and he hires a ghostwriter. He has the ghostwriter write an ebook on how to teach your parrot to talk. Frank starts driving traffic to that. And Frank essentially starts making $3,000 a month from an ebook on how to teach your parrot to talk. I think it was $3,000, $3,600 a month or something. And about the time this happened, Frank met Ed Dale, and he and Ed Dale were having coffee. And Ed Dale had helped his sister-in-law start a wedding planning business, and she was making about $3,600 a month. Frank was making $3,600 a month. And they decided to create a product called the Underachiever Method. And this would have been Frank's, essentially, his second product. Now, this is the thing. The Underachiever Method was teaching people how to get online and make your first dollar online. And that's essentially what the backdrop was to it. But it was being taught in the UK. Frank was working with Ed Dale, but Frank's not from the UK, so he was more of a paid speaker and a part owner than actually a seminar producer or anything like that. So he felt, you know, the FTC could not come after him because, number one, it was outside the US, and number two, he wasn't really like producing it and creating it. He was more working with the people who were doing that. So essentially, they created the Underachiever Method, and they sold that. And they sold the Underachiever Method. Frank had a list of about 6,000 people, and he came back to the U.S. And he was trying to find another business to start, but he couldn't come up with a new idea. So this is the thing you want to think about it. Frank's selling $3,000 worth of Teach Your Parrot to Talk ebooks. So what would be the next thing to teach? Well, Frank had put in all these fences, invisible fences for dogs. So Frank thought, well, wait a minute, I'll just do a dog training. So Frank goes back out to the internet and he hires someone to create a product that would train your dog. But the other thing that Frank did, see, there are 600 different dog breeds. And it was going to be very difficult to put a website up that says train your poodle and then train your chihuahua and then train your German shepherd. So Frank went out and started looking for software, and he either had the software created or he bought this software where you could essentially take a niche, you could plug the software in, and it would immediately make 600 landing pages, 600 websites, 600 squeeze pages for every single dog breed, right? So he went from like creating a few at a time to making 600 of these by pushing a button. And this is what happened. When he started selling training in all of those 600 different dog breeds, Frank's income shot to $1 million a year. He was immediately making $1 million a year. But this is the thing. He had affiliates, he had traffic costs. So Frank was making $600,000 a year. But after creating this system and making $1 million with it, he decided he would teach other people how to do it. And he created a product called the serializer method. So what's happened here is very simple. Frank made $1 million, and then he was going to teach other people how he made the $1 million teaching the serializer method. And by the way, this is actually a pattern that Frank repeats throughout his life. He would create his process or system. He would make $1 million using that process or system, and then he would go out to the marketplace and essentially teach other people how he had done that. So Frank decides to sell the serializer method, and he's going to sell this for $10,000. Frank had a list of only 6,000 people, and those were the people who had bought the underachiever method. And Frank had no idea what kind of response he would get. And so what Frank did is he sent out an offer to 3,000 people who had bought the underachiever method, and he made them an offer for the serializer method for $10,000. And he sold 50 of these in 4 minutes. So Frank sent out an offer to 3,000 people, a $10,000 offer, and he made 50 sales in 4 minutes, or he made $500,000. About an hour later, he sent the offer out to the other 3,000, and in 50 minutes, he sold another 50. So he essentially, in 54 minutes, made $1 million selling the serializer method to people as a training. And how he actually did this, he essentially sent them a letter. He couldn't tell them what he was going to be teaching, because if he explained serializer, how you essentially, take a product and then you niche it into all these sub-products using software, if he explained that, people would essentially be able to go out and find their own software or make their software and sell it. So what Frank said is, look, I've made $1 million with this program. I'm going to teach it. It's called the serializer method. If this is something you're interested in, before I tell you anything about what it is, you will need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will need to sign that in front of my attorney before I give you any of the content. The price is $10,000. I'm only teaching it to 100 people, so you need to sign up, and when you show up, you need to be prepared to sign the non-disclosure agreement at the seminar, and my attorney will be present. So essentially, he used the non-disclosure agreement as takeaway. He also didn't really want to tell them what serializer was up front in this particular instance, but that's essentially how he was able to do it. Now there's a huge takeaway here. Frank has an income of $600,000 a year coming from the dog training business, the niche business. Frank makes $1 million in one day, but Frank said that it wasn't the $1 million in one day that was the big deal here. It was the idea he could make $1 million in one day. And he said, I knew that no matter what happened, I was always going to do well, because I knew I could repeat this process. And so what Frank got from this, more than the $1 million, is he got a mindset. And the mindset was that any process can be duplicatable. If I've done it once, I can do it again. And this really propelled Frank Kern forward. So a few months later, Frank is actually reading a People magazine. And he comes across an article about Neil Strauss. Neil Strauss is a writer for the Rolling Stone magazine, and he has written a book called The Game. And The Game is about dating. It's about picking up women. And Frank thought it was very, very interesting because Frank knew Dean Jackson. Dean Jackson knew Evan Pagan, and Evan Pagan owned a business called Double Your Dating. Now, this is the thing. Frank had never even met Evan Pagan, but Frank knew Dean Jackson, and Dean and Evan were really, really good friends. And so Frank went and bought the book, and he bought the book only because he thought, the book's about dating. My friend Dean Jackson knows Evan Pagan because Evan Pagan's in the dating business. Maybe Evan's going to be mentioned in this book. So he reads this book just hoping that maybe a friend of a friend's being mentioned in it. And he reads the book. He gives the book to his cousin Trey Smith, who's also doing very, very well in internet marketing. And Trey reads the book. And Trey comes back to Frank a few weeks later and says, Frank, this book is awesome. We need to get a hold of Neil Strauss. And we need to convince Neil Strauss to have a seminar and train people on this pickup method, on the game, and then what we need to do is take that and create a packaged product, and we could make a lot of money. Now, Frank's reaction to this is essentially, why would Neil Strauss work with us? I mean, Neil Strauss, he is a national #1 best-selling author. He works for the Rolling Stone. He's essentially a businessman, and he probably graduated at Ivy League school. And Frank Kern and his cousin are internet marketers. They're really nobodies. No one really knows them, right? And so Frank's saying, there's no chance whatsoever we're going to get this guy to work with us. So I'm not sure how the story got out there, and Frank's not sure how, but essentially someone who had bought the serializer method knew Neil Strauss. And that person went to Neil Strauss and said, Neil, I think you should speak to Frank Kern and Trey Smith. These guys are marketers. These guys are doing very well. They might be able to help you to make a lot of money. Now, again, just by happenstance, any of this actually happens. But Neil Strauss calls Frank Kern and Trey Smith. And Frank essentially, this is essentially what they tell Neil. They say basically, Neil, I've got this idea. I think if you were to do a high-end seminar, we could take that recording that you created and we could actually offer it to this niche group of people, and I think we could make some money. But there are no guarantees. We've never done this for someone else. We haven't worked outside the internet marketing world, but we do think this would work. And Neil Strauss says, sure, let's try it. And so what they essentially did, they put 20 or 30 people in a room and they charged $8,000 for the seminar. And the whole reason for the seminar was essentially just to create a recorded product. That was the only reason behind it. But they made a little bit of money up front. They made a couple of $100,000. They actually recorded this product and they actually released it, and it was called The Annihilation Method. And the Annihilation Method was released by Frank Kern, Trey Smith, and Neil Strauss. And the Annihilation Method was released for $3,500, and it did $1.4 million in 4 hours. And that money was essentially split 3 ways between Frank, Trey, and Neil Strauss. So Frank had actually had a number of successful launches. He had Instant Internet Empires, the Underachiever Method, the Serializer, and then after that, the Neil Strauss Annihilation Method, right? So he'd had a number of things happen, and he was in the process of moving from Macon, Georgia to California. Frank got a call from Mike Long, and Mike Long wanted Frank to help with the launch for StomperNet. Now, the StomperNet was owned by Brad Fallon and Andy Jenkins. And there was something weird going on. There was a guy Frank didn't like in high school, and Frank thought that guy was friends with one of those guys. And so Frank didn't want to do the launch. He said it was just really silly, right? But he just didn't want to do the launch. But he did not want to tell Mike Long no because he was friends with Mike. So what he said, Mike, tell those guys I will not do the launch unless they give me $25,000 up front. And he thought this would be the end of it. He thought this would kill the deal. He could go surfing. There would be no issues. A few days later, they told him everything was a go, and essentially they gave him the 25 grand. And what happened after he got the money, he found out that this person he didn't like wasn't friends with one of them anyway. It was just basically a complete misunderstanding. And so Frank ultimately brings his cousin Trey in, and Trey, Frank Kern, Andy Jenkins, and Brad Fallon essentially worked for 4 months to do the StomperNet launch. And their goal on the StomperNet launch was $10 million. And what they ultimately did is they ultimately did, I think, like $18 million in 24 hours. Now, there are a couple of things here about this launch. First of all, it wasn't 24 hours straight. They were concerned, I think, they would crash servers because they were doing such a huge launch at the time. So what they would do is they would open the launch for like 2 hours, and then they would shut it off for a while and then open it again. But in the 24 hours the thing was open, they actually did around 18 million. Now this is another thing. Not all of that money came in at once because some of those people took a one year payment subscription. But Frank said ultimately like 10.2 million came in. Now, interestingly enough, Frank Kern was not paid a percentage of that money. That's not how the deal was structured. He was essentially paid the $25,000 to help them launch the thing. But they ultimately did bring him in as a consultant. He did make some more money that way. And after he made this money, he was starting to kind of see how this thing could ultimately end up being. He knew he could essentially build something in this group of people in the internet marketing niche. And again, the other thing that happened is Frank was moving from Macon, Georgia to California. He's making $600,000 a year from this dog business, the dog niche. And he's doing these launches, but his actual income is $600,000 a year. And in Macon, Georgia, he's got like the biggest house in Macon, Georgia, and his mortgage payment's like $3,000 a month. He was looking for a house to buy in California, and while he was looking for a house to buy, he ultimately stumbled onto a house he decided he was going to buy to renovate and then sell. And that house was like $1.5 million. He was also going to spend another $1 million on it. And then right after that, he found another house that he was going to buy, and that was around $2.5 million. And so what happened is Frank is used to having a $3,000 mortgage payment, and Frank's mortgage ends up being like $30,000 between everything that he's paying. And not only does his mortgage go up by a very, very substantial amount of money, Frank starts associating himself with a lot of high-earning people. And what happened when he was in Macon, Georgia, he was probably the highest earner there. But everyone he was associating with in California, they were all making $1 million, $2 million, and $3 million a year. And so it changed his mindset, and he decided he needed to create more wealth just because of the people he was hanging around with. And so what he ultimately did is he created and he launched Mass Control. And Mass Control did like $12 million in a few days. And of the $12 million, a lot of that was affiliate money. So he gave away half the money in affiliates. And then I think he said he had a 20% return or refund rate. But he still ended up making $4 or $5 million. And that Mass Control essentially put Frank on the map. What I want you to think about is, like I said, the mindset. The reason I studied these guys from the beginning was the mindset behind where they got the idea from and why they did what they did. And if you look at Frank's progression, it was just a change in mindset from one area to another. When he went from Macon, Georgia to California, complete change in mindset. $600,000 was not enough money to be making in California, so he ultimately created a lot of money by releasing the Mass Control. When Frank started selling what he is selling now, which is essentially the high-paid advisor method, the first time he actually sold that, it was all behind a mindset thing. What had happened is Frank was working a lot with Trey Smith, his cousin, and they had a couple of guys come in who were like experts in different things. And one of these guys had a list of like 800 people or something, and he had floated an offer to that group and made some ridiculous amount of money in like 2 or 3 days. The money was like 300,000 or 400,000 from a very small list, and these people are used to spending $79, and he floated a $5,000 or $10,000 offer to these people, and he ultimately made a very large amount of money in a short amount of time. And there's always competition among these people, and so Trey Smith decided, well, you know what? If he can do that, I'm going to do it. And Trey floated an offer to a group of people, and Trey made $1.6 million in a very short amount of time. And because Trey had done it, now Frank needed to do it. And so Frank, and this is like in the middle of October, Frank had decided he was going to make about $1 million or $1.5 million by December 1st. And he came up with the offer for essentially what he's selling now, which is the high-paid advisor formula, where he teaches people over 8-week course and he charges $8,000 for that. But he essentially came up with the idea in mid-October. He wrote the sales letter, and in the meantime, his wife, who was pregnant at the time, ends up in the hospital and is having some major complications. And he had actually sent the letter out and was actually creating the webinar in the hospital room, and actually releases that webinar the next day. And what he ultimately does is he sells 65 of these at $10,000 a person, and he makes $650,000 in just a few days. Now, he didn't hit the goal of the 1.5 million, but he said when he looked back on it, he was glad he didn't sell 150 of them, because what he was teaching was highly technical, and he just didn't feel like the training would be as good if he were to actually teach 150 of these people this content at the same time. So he's very happy with the result. And now, that is essentially Frank Kern's model. That is actually what he's teaching, that actually drives people into the front end, which is the high-paid advisor formula, and on the back end he sells them a couple of different coaching plans, and that's essentially his formula now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end out. I hope you've all got some value from this. Again, a little bit choppy. I'm sorry about that. I really just wanted to show you a progression and a mindset of how someone starts with nothing or less than nothing and just continually tries things without knowing whether it's going to work or not, and putting offers out in the marketplace, and they ultimately do very, very well. So again, I appreciate you all watching this.